All right, welcome back everybody to the brain injury discussion. This is your host Jay. We're coming at you today with some historic figures with brain injuries and something that I'm a big history buff. Some of you might be history buffs out there, but we're going to get into some interesting stories about people that we've probably read about and who definitely had a brain injury. Again, these can range, but I think it's important to note that this affected people not just in modern times, but also back in the past. And with this video, we just want to tell a little bit of their stories. As always, references will be in the description below. We'd appreciate a good thumbs up and also a subscription if you'd like. Feel free to leave a comment if you have any historic figures that I left out or that you would like to see covered. But with that being said, let's get into it. We got a lot to cover. Uh, Phineas Gage is probably the one that most people with this brain injury world will talk about. Phineas Gage is this man right here. He was a railroad worker from the 1840s. So again, that's a dangerous job even today, but it was especially dangerous back then, especially around this material called dynamite or nitroglycerin. Like all of these are dangerous substances. We talk about dangerous jobs before, right? Um, and he was the first well-documented brain injury survivor. Um, and again, this happened via his job. It was an accident with this big bar right here going through his skull. And as you can see, he lost his eye right here, and he suffered some very bad frontal lobe injury, specifically the left one. He was previously a well-adjusted person who was a foreman, which is, at the time, even today, an important job. But afterwards, his personality and his maturity was affected. So, a lot of reversion from that frontal lobe. And so, this is a prime example of why brain injury does matter. Because prior to this, yes, he was a foreman. He worked on the railroad. He was working a dangerous job, but he was smart about it. And because of one accident, it changed his life. It changed his family's life. It changed everything about him. So, again, this is probably the most well documented brain injury that we know of, at least from modern times or quasi modern times. So, definitely an industrial era accident. And there's probably a ton more like this that we don't really know about or were really studied, but he was probably the first one to really be in-depthly studied and examined. So this gave the brain injury world and as well as neurology in general a good leg up. So let's continue. Let's look at our 16th president, President Abraham Lincoln. Um, when he was 10 and 11 years old, so again, this happened when he was still very much developing. He was kicked in the head by a horse. Now, anyone who's been around horses, I've been around horses and camels myself. I know that they can be rather temperamental at times, but he was knocked unconscious and thought to be dead. And he did recover, and he went on to become a president. But you can see where he was kicked. He was kicked right in this eye. So as you can see, if you're able to zoom in, you'll be able to see that this eye is pointing pretty much straight forward. And this eye is pointing a little bit off to what is probably his top left. A little bit of a deviation there. And again, if you read anything deep about Abraham Lincoln, you find that there were some periods of melancholy, periods of depression, and not saying that was from this brain injury, but it probably had a role to play in. So again, this is a brain injury. He was knocked unconscious. This is probably at least a concussion, probably a fracture. But he eventually recovered and made a bid and won the presidency of the United States, especially in a pivotal time in American history. So, not to get into his politics or anything, but this probably affected him throughout his life, especially from the young early age of 10 or 11. So, that being said, let's move into the next character. Harriet Tubman, of course, abolitionist, Underground Railroad. Um, and again, that was dangerous, but prior to that, she was a slave and she was hit in the head by a piece of iron. And it caused a broken skull and a depressed skull fracture. It led made a lasting deformity. So again, this was something that probably plagued her throughout her entire life, and it led to this. What they called, and the source is right here if you want to back that up, sleeping fits. So we call that seizures now. And again, that can be a result of a brain injury. Seizures, that'll be a whole nother video about seizures, what happens during a seizure, maybe what we should do during a seizure. But a seizure is where you get a lot of activity and it's, you know, irregular. So what we have here is someone who had sleeping fits, and that was probably a very apt way to describe it because it might have happened to her in her sleep. But then again, she did rise above that brain injury. So there's something to be said there about, overcoming something like that and doing something amazing. So, but with that being said, she's another example a brain injury, happened younger, but still led a full life. So, but there was still a lasting effect, especially those sleeping fits, aka seizures. But let's move on. Woodrow Wilson. This is going to be a more in-depth one. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on him. He was the 28th president of the United States during the time of the Great War, what we now know as World War One. Before that, he actually had a stroke in 1896 while he was at Princeton University. He was working there, and it left him with some weakness and a dexterity loss on the affected side, which his affected side was the right side. Probably made it a little bit more difficult to sign bills or grade papers if we're thinking about it. But right after the war, in 1919, he suffered a severe stroke, or a CVA. If you've listened to our previous videos about stroke, you'll know what CVA stands for, cerebrovascular accident. So that is important. So, and the stroke was covered up and hidden from the public. I mean, who wants to see the president of the United States have a stroke? That was bad news. So, again, he recovered from the first one, but the second stroke permanently injured him. So, and you look at the years, that is about over 20 years difference, that's a big difference right there. And so the second stroke left him permanently injured, but he was not, he finished out his term and the next president took over. That would have been Warren Harding. So, but that being said, that tells us a lot about, stroke reoccurrence. So obviously he did recover some from his first stroke, but it still left him with some permanent damage. So that being said, that's Woodrow Wilson's strokes in a nutshell. General Hooker, which again, if you are in Virginia like I am, um, he was known as a competent general during the War of 1861 and 1865, and he was the Army commander in charge of the Union forces at Chancellorsville in 1863. But during that battle on May 3rd, a cannonball struck a pillar of the house, and he was struck, and I'm quoting this from the source down below, unconscious, stunned, and he was made senseless. What what does that mean? So he lost consciousness. So chances are he was probably hit in the head by a piece of wood or probably by the concussive effect of that cannonball. At the time, he was temporarily unable to command. Uh, Again, if you were made senseless or stunned or unconscious, you'd probably be unable to command too. But he eventually did return to command and he recovered, but there was probably some lasting deficits there. But then again, when a war is going on, chances are you're probably not anxious to see a doctor about maybe a slight headache. So again, this is another one of those stories where this might have affected him later in life, but it also affected him when it happened. So with that being said, that's another example from the military context of yes, this man got a concussion even back in 1863. So I think this is a good example. He got a concussion. He was left senseless. But that being said, let's think about this. Let's think about it logically. Um, some historic figures had brain injuries. So again, these are famous people. Um, Brain injuries are present throughout history. And I just picked a few. There's plenty we can do. And again, if you have a suggestion of one you would like to see me research, by all means, throw it in the chat. I'll see what I can do. Um, I would love to research that stuff, and I'm a big history buff too. So, but some of these people were able to overcome these injuries. And the brain is very important. It's important to a railroad worker, someone who works the Underground Railroad, presidents or people in positions of power and generals. So, and these lasting effects, they can happen. But again, this might be able to inspire us to rise above those challenges, find ways around those challenges, and continue on to greatness, like Abraham Lincoln, who was 10 or 11 years old when he got kicked in the head and knocked unconscious by a horse. Um, he eventually became a president of the United States. And the same thing goes with Woodrow Wilson, who also became president of the United States after his first stroke in 1896, after being at Princeton University. Same thing goes with General Hooker, who was able to uh, be put back into command after his brain injury or his concussion at the Battle of Chancellorsville. Same thing goes with, um, the abolitionist Harriet Tubman. She was able to continue doing her wonderful work as well. And so these are stories meant to inspire us. And again, maybe someone like Phineas Gage could have benefited from a case manager and also maybe benefited from attending a day program. But with that being said, like always, sources are in the description below. Feel free to look into these. Leave a comment if you have a brain injury you want me to look into or a historic figure you want me to look into. This is just a cursory glance of the 1800s, but send them my way. I love hearing about them. With that being said, I think that'll do it. And those are my resources. Feel free to look them up. They're very interesting, especially if you're a history buff like I am. So, that being said, feel free to give us a thumbs up or a subscription, and we will talk to you soon. Have a wonderful day, everybody.